So I'm getting on here with another episode. I mean, basically because I'm bored. So I figure, if I got time to sit around, I got time to to record an episode. Um, I don't know. Amazon's process is like extremely slow. I'm not sure if I'm not sure which one is worse, watching paint dry or Amazon's hiring process. I'm pretty sure they're like neck and neck. But I'm like at this point, I'm about ready to just go and stand on a freeway exit end and with a sign that says I'm bored. No need to give me any money. I'm just bored. Because I'm not used to. I'm really not used uh to just sitting around because I'm always moving. When I was working at the scrapyard, that was 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, 8 hours on Saturday, sometimes. Um, when I was I was at Argus, that was 8 hours a day, sometimes Saturdays. Railroad, that was all over the place. Work whenever they call you. Uh, Uber and Lyft, that was 5 days a week, 12 hours a day. So just sitting at home is not. I don't know. It's just not something that it's just not me. I don't think. And it kind of makes me think about when I retire. It's gonna be extremely hard for me to retire because it's like you got to find stuff to do. You're no longer part of the working world. You know what I'm saying? You have to go get like a part-time job or something like that. I would say um I'm not really hopeful about getting remarried, but if I could find somebody that we could exist in the same environment and they're not trying to change me, I'm not trying to change them. They're on their own thing. You know what I'm saying? I don't want anybody depending on me for anything, because the biggest mistake that I feel, and I'm going off on a little bit of a different subject here because I just thought about it. Biggest mistake I think that people can do is you get in a relationship with somebody and you're dependent on them for everything. You know, I mean, if I get with you, I expect you to be A to Z, set up financially, emotionally. I expect you to have your ducks in order. I got mine in order. And if I don't, mine are, I'm taking care of mine. You know what I'm saying? I'm out of my job. I had funds that I can use that are getting me through that little period. Looking, landed another job, in that process, funds are still holding me up until that gets started. So, I'm not gonna say I haven't always been in that position. I've had to ask people for stuff. So I'm not saying don't ask people for anything. I'm just saying kind of know what you're getting into. Don't just look at the outer surface. Oh, she's baddest thing I ever seen, but she more than likely got more problems than you ever seen. And this you're you're doing a person more harm than good by even getting with them. And I'll be the first one to say it. You know, if I was my ex-wife, I would have never married me when we did. I just wasn't in a position to be married. You know what I'm saying? I was still on my hustle journey. You know, So, just a little bit of just a tidbit. I won't get into that this episode. But for those of you that well, you know what? I think I did do an episode on doing the work on yourself. Um that's in my catalog. And it's basically just talking about, the simple process of doing the work on yourself. And it's not that hard. You just have to, it's just the way you structure it. Me, I figured out what my definition of love was. Once I figured out a definition for love that would work for that particular process, then it all fell in line. And I that's what I live by. That's the whole thing. That's where it starts. I used to be jealous of people who put themselves first, but now, put yourself first and don't be ashamed of it. If the other person don't like it, that's them. They're the one with the problem, literally. They're the one with the problem because they have an issue with you putting yourself first. They just don't realize it. And what you need to understand is you can't find them for them. As long as you can understand it, as long as you can see it, the fact that they're having these issues, that's just the person you don't want to be with. That's a person that you have to let them go, and you have to let them figure it out. Because not many people are understanding enough to say, okay, I'm going to listen to you and I'm going to follow, what you're saying, just to try it out. Not many people can say, hey, what do I have to lose? Most people, a lot of people are going to say, you don't know everything. Or that's not true for everybody. Doesn't have to be. Really doesn't, because you're not responsible for anybody else's emotional state but yours. You're not even responsible for your kids' emotional state. They're responsible for it. They just have to realize it. So it only has to work for you. And the people who don't want to follow it, that's on them. People are dying every single day because of one simple reason that I think. They didn't put themselves first. They didn't love themselves enough to put themselves first. Because that's my definition of love. My definition of love is just doing stuff you don't want to do. People eat, at these restaurants every day, eat McDonald's, eat tons of stuff that they know they shouldn't be eating. Love. Real simple. Doing stuff that you don't want to do. In love. Making that feeling of doing what you don't want to do a priority. Love yourself. Be in love with yourself. Therefore, you're putting yourself first. And once you understand that, it no longer becomes it no longer becomes a selfish type of situation. It becomes an understandable situation because other people see it that way and they say, oh, so putting yourself first means you love yourself, means you loving yourself. Exactly. You're loving yourself and you're in love with yourself. So you're putting yourself first, and in the process of that whole thing, you're doing stuff that you don't want to do because you love yourself. You're stopping going to McDonald's, you're cutting out chips, you're doing this, you're exercising, you're doing all this other stuff, all because of that. But other people they have to be self-disciplined enough to stop and think about that kind of stuff. And most people aren't. That's, just the honest to God truth. Most people are not self-disciplined enough to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do also, because there's a place that I want to be that I'm not right now, and that's that's what I want to do. So you have to remember that, and once you remember that, then it becomes so much easier in that process, and you understand it a lot more, and you can see, looking around, you can see, people who are in they're just not in good situations, and you just tend to just kind of, you understand where they're coming from, and you just stay away from them, and that's where your peace comes in, because you love yourself enough to say, I can't be around these people. You love yourself enough to say, you know what, I'm not going to be in that situation. I'm not going to go over here. I'm not going to, do this. I'm not going to do that, because part of loving yourself is protecting your peace. And I can tell you firsthand, once you have found your peace, oh my God, you just don't want to be bothered. You just don't want to be bothered. Because let's be honest. Let's be honest for a second. Most of the people that you know right now are not your friends. They're not even people that you should have ever given a chance to. But the reason they became your friends, more than likely, is because at one point in time, y'all were on the same level. But most people don't have the, I'm not going to say they don't have the ambition. They just don't have the self-discipline to start putting things forward to start getting somewhere. The sad part about today's world, and I see it all the time, is that there are more men that like to huddle up and talk about other men. And I'm not saying anything, there's nothing against the LGBT community, but I'm talking about straight men that will sit up and talk about another guy. Me personally, I'm not going to talk to no other dude about some other guy. And as soon as a dude walks up to me and starts talking about some other dude, I walk off. That's not a conversation that I want to have. I got better things to do. It's not my concern. If the guy is not bothering me, or it's not affecting my funds, or I'm not making no money off of what the dude doing and what he got ain't mine, I could care less. I honestly could care less. And I'm not going to spend any minute of my time being worried about it. But in today's world, that has become a thing. Where guys will get together and you got this huddle of guys, over here talking about another dude. It's like, kind of step out of that situation for a minute and kind of think about that. Okay, I'm a dude. Number one, I'm huddled up with my buddies, when I could be doing tons of other stuff. But we're huddled up talking about this other guy. Like, how much sense does that make? Not much, at least in my book. That's something that, don't get me wrong, at one point in time I did do it. Everybody has to grow. But I'm so glad that I got out of that situation. I'm so glad that I can look back and say, yes, that's not good for me. Yeah, love you, your family, but you're just not good for me. I had to cut off a whole lot of people because it's just not good for me. You know, and I'm done being your, coming around to be your class clown. You know, come around, everybody got their nose turned up. Come around, everybody's gossiping. Come around, everybody got their frowns and all this other stuff. Like, yeah, it's not doing it. I'm not doing it. I'm good. Y'all have fun doing you. But I just wanted to get a quick episode out real quick. Just me yapping. I hope everybody's having a good day, or I hope everybody had a good day. Hope everybody is gonna have a good weekend. I'm in Detroit. It's raining outside right now. But beyond that, I'm not sure. I'm thinking about going to get me some ice cream. Maybe that's kind of what I feel like doing. Some ice cream and some corn chips. That's kind of what I got a taste for. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. But until next time, this is the Narrative Mindset. Have a good one.